Tattoo artists, what was your worst mistake and how did the client react? I had a client who decided he wanted lettering on his forearms, sayings in Greek and Hebrew. He doesn't speak either language, but he had one of his friends double check the spelling before he sent the references to me. Came in, we did the tattoos. Pretty simple appointment. Fast forward to a couple weeks later. I got a message from my client about the tattoo that was done in Hebrew. He owns a small construction/restoration company and has a few Israeli guys who work for him. Apparently, they were giving him a lot of shit for his Hebrew tattoo. He originally thought they were just messing with him because it was spelled wrong. The font he had chosen off a quick Google search essentially changed a couple of the letters, kinda like the difference between an F and a T, making it a completely different word. We ended up being able to fix it pretty easily and had a good laugh about it, but definitely beware when you're getting tattoos in a language you and your artist don't speak. So I didn't mess up, but I had a client scare me. I was tattooing his sister's name on him. She passed away. Gabriela with one L in it. Past the point of no return, he asks me, there's 2 L's, right? I think I had a heart attack and he started laughing. He thought it was hilarious. I died a little and pretended to laugh. A few years ago I was tattooing a client who had apparently lost a bet. His buddies were allowed to tattoo something behind his shoulder as long as it wasn't racist or offensive. Turns out the guy drew up a design of a leprechaun throwing up on a book. Sure, why not? Everyone was sober and they were paying pounds up front. Easy work. The drawing was really simple and the shading was easier than I thought it'd be. Turns out everyone liked it, except the guy with the tattoo of a leprechaun throwing up on a book. He picked at the scab, trying to get rid of it, completely took it from bad to worse. Comes in about 10 days later, demanding a refund of money he didn't pay, or the studio, not me, cover it up. Nope, management said you signed for it in your right mind and then damaged it yourself. Personally, I was yelled at and told never to tattoo anyone like that. It only works in television series or film. Did I make a mistake? Yes and no. The lesson here is, don't get involved in others' drama when permanent body marking is involved. When I was but a wee baby piercer, I worked at the biggest shop in my city, which had 14 artists and 2 piercers. It was the peak of the tramp stamp trend. I'm still so sad that was the nickname. As Sandler's was so much better, so when a super tiny 18-year-old black woman came in and wanted her name on her lower back with a flower, it was just normal. An older white male tattoo artist took her to pick a font. It took a minute, even though back then everyone went with Edwardian, but they came out. I had her do paperwork and he got the drawing finished. She okayed the design, she okayed the stencil, she sat for the tattoo, loved it, tipped him and left. 2 hours later she called back sobbing, saying we ruined her life. The counter girl told her to come in and we would fix whatever was wrong. Tattoo comes back with her 2 gigantic angry AF friends who are ready to freak out. We finally see the tattoo. Her name was Whitney. The N got left out in the font process. So huge across her lower back it said Witty. It was covered for free and with many apologies with 3 giant purple roses. The tattoo artist was so fucked up that he didn't come in for a week. It was an honest mistake, but it was the worst fucking spelling error I've seen. My only spelling mistake ever was in Italian. Girl wants a phrase in Italian. She writes it down no less than 5x on a paper. I tell her to make sure it is correct. I don't speak Italian. She insists it is correct. I draw up some nice script, tattoo it with no issues, bandage, pay, and she leaves. She comes back in hysterical and tells me I spelled it wrong. I hadn't thrown out the paper. I spelled it exactly how she spelled it. I asked what she wanted to do and she decided ain't no one I know speaks Italian. That was about 15 years ago. I often wonder if she ended up getting it covered up. Worked as a piercer in a shop a decade ago. A guy came in and wanted Murphy's Law. The artist free-handed a design on him. He greenlit it after watching in the mirror and they did a beautiful piece with a banner saying Murphy's Law. Seemed fitting. The guy loved the fact that his one messed up tattoo was the Murphy's Law one. Apprentice here. Nothing major but bad karma on one tattoo from the get-go that absolutely flogged my confidence for a bit. Only recently did my first ever small tattoo on a client. Had to do a small range of flash ideas. that I felt comfortable with. Had my mentor, who, judging by some other stories, I'm very lucky to have. He's a sound dude, discussed with me beforehand my needle choices, placement technique, usual bits and was ready to go. Everyone felt ready. Midway through, my machine goes. It's brand new. My only one. Managed to sort it without much fuss. In doing so, in my panic put the wrong needle size in the machine. When it came to replacing it with a fresh one. Botched a line. When I realized almost immediately the size difference. Change again. Nerves are shot. Back at it. Brand new foot pedal breaks. Replace it with an old one from my mentor. It breaks too. Power pack dies. That was brand new too. Panic. Spill my ink. Practically had a meltdown in my brain about what had happened. Carried on with another artist's equipment. Apologizing as calmly as I can to my client. Mentor calmed my nerves and I ended up pulling it out of the bag and doing a job I was happy with somehow, but most importantly, the client loved it. Anyway, not a crazy bad story, but as an apprentice who's also a fairly confident dude, I have never felt so absolutely flawed in my life. Tattooing someone is monumentally stressful when all doesn't go to plan. I can't wait to do more and progress, but fuck me, what a time for shit to happen. My mentor helped me sort all my gear afterward and was super cool. Sat with me and said something like, well, of all the times and all the things that cold gone wrong, that was the absolutely perfect one for the nerve-wracking stuff. I was working at a place when a guy came in for a full back piece of 3 different cars. It took like 4 visits to finish, and each visit he'd look at it and say it looks awesome, and then he would take off. On the last visit, they called me in to look at it to show me how awesome it turned out. Well, all the steering wheels were on the wrong side, and the reason no one caught it was because a dude was looking in a mirror to check his progress, so they looked correct. I'm pretty sure the guy was super chill about it when they offered a bunch of free work and they fixed it in another session. I was a receptionist at a tattoo shop. One of the artists misspelled neighborhood on this guy's neck. He spelled it neighborhood, leaving out the first H. Neighborhood was the guy's nickname. It was a pretty large elaborate tattoo, so there was no fixing it. I don't think I have ever cringed so hard in my life. The guy was surprisingly really cool about it. He did see the drawing and approved it before it was tattooed on. He ended up making the artist tattoo a H on his palm, so if anyone gave him shit about the misspelling, he could smack that person with the missing H. I had a client email me asking for a 4-letter acronym. I don't do freehand script, so I put the letters into a font generator and sent him back some options. He picked the one he liked best, and we set an appointment date. On the day of his session, I showed him the acronym again, and we chose a size. I placed the stencil and he approved it, and I got started. Midway through the tattoo I asked him what the letters stood for, and he told me. My heart stopped. The letters were in the wrong order. The middle 2 were swapped. I ran to the shop computer to check my email, and sure enough, in his original email he'd sent me, they'd been correct. I had typed them into the font generator wrong. But to be fair, he had seen them several times since then and didn't notice my mistake. I spent the rest of the session covering them up with another design he'd had as a backup tattoo idea, and I didn't charge him. But it was a good learning experience for me to always ask what initials / acronyms stand for ahead of time to make sure I get them in the right order. I gave a guy a tattoo in prison of his girlfriend's name on his arm. I knew him on the street and his girl, and knew it was going nowhere, and insisted he change his mind. He didn't, so I made a bet with him that shit was gonna go belly up within 6 months. When we got out of segregation and back onto the yard, a few weeks passed at most, and I can see him having a bad conversation on the phone. He called me over to his cell and offered me up a huge fucking sack of commissary without a word. I didn't take it, figured he needed it more than me. Still feel like shit to this day. I was doing a big old tattoo of Cringer, aka Battlecat, on a really cool client's leg. I got so into doing this big, awesome tiger head that I forgot that it wasn't a goddamn tiger and colored the stripes black. I realized about a third of the way through filling them in and let the guy know. He was disappointed, but mostly okay with it. I felt like I was going to puke. I finished the thing feeling so fucking sick and then refused payment. Man, Going from that feeling of elation to immediate crushing disappointment was hard to shake and kind of dazed me. It was extra crushing because it was a fun tattoo during a time when I wasn't that busy and was doing mostly absolute dreck. The payment was just the icing on the top, so letting that go was hard too. Ugh, just thinking about it now is making me feel sick. I was working at a shop in New York City. This very heavy-set gentleman came in and wanted a full back piece. No other tattoos. The design was very elaborate and quite good. Once it was all approved, the tattoo stencil was applied and again approved by the client. I wasn't doing the tattoo, but I was occasionally checking in on the process. Once the line work was done as shading had begun, I noticed something horrible. The stencil was applied over his rolls of skin on his lower back. I made a comment to the artist privately. He went back to tattooing, moved the skin apart at one point, and without a doubt several inches of tattooed skin. The client never noticed. I stopped working there not too long after that. Not for this reason. I've always felt so bad for that guy. Tattoo artist here. Best case I ever saw. A guy came into our shop asking about a cover up. The tattoo wasn't done at our place. He had what we call a belly rocker. One of those lettering tattoos that arcs over the belly. Think Tommy Lee's Mayhem tattoo. Usually gothic font, gangster type piece. He had beautifully executed, bold, black Old English letters across his belly that were supposed to read, "Scarred for life." Whoever did the tattoo, as well as the tattooed guy, had forgotten one of the letters. An R. This guy came in with "Scarred for life" on his belly. We showed him some cover-up options, including full torso, Japanese-style bodysuit stuff. Someone may have joked about doing the old proofreading trick of just putting a little red arrow and adding the missing letter. I don't know who did the thing, but never saw him again after giving cost estimates for the giant cover-up. 15 or so years ago, we still joke about this one. Did my first one on an old schoolmate who was aware of my artistic abilities, despite having never applied ink before, and he offered me his back. I had 3 pros watching as I drew a geisha free-handed on his back while he was hunched over. When the design was laid out, he checked it in the mirror and was good with it, so I began lining it. The thing is, the other artists said it looked great, but unfortunately I was doing something else when he checked it, so I didn't notice just how screwed up it really was anyway. I lined it, and we took a break. As he stood up, while I was watching, my heart dropped as I witnessed the geisha's face droop into a palsied state on one side. He was sitting leaned forward with his elbows on his knees while drawing it, and so distorted the canvas. Now, this sounds shitty, but I never really liked this guy too much. He originally wanted a back full of strippers, so I didn't feel bad that when he went to look in the mirror, he lifted his shoulder to look at the tattoo, which normalized the proportions, and he said it looked awesome. Well, good then. Big lesson learned though. I still have the occasional nightmare over it. Misspelled the name Jamie, Jame. I asked the client for the spelling and showed the client the laid out script before it was applied. So not my fault. The client was very disgusted with himself for not knowing how to spell the name of the woman he loved enough to show it on his skin for life. I felt sorry for the guy, so I offered him a cover up at an incredible discount as well as the name reapplied spelled correctly. Unfortunately he never took me up on that offer. Artist here. Spelling mistakes are common in the industry. I'm the first to tell a customer that I'm a terrible speller, so they had better check everything before the needle hits the skin. I once had a customer who had to call his wife and confirm how they spelled their daughter's name before we got started, and it's a good thing he did. But oftentimes the worst backquote mistakes are stray lines, most often caused by flinching or missing details, usually a result of losing part of a stencil during the tattoo process. I've heard of clients being fairly crushed by tattoo mistakes, but generally they can be corrected with a little creativity and skill. My worst mistake was made when I was learning to tattoo. As an apprentice I had to take what I could get when it came to practicing. Thank goodness for dumb friends. I tattooed over some very thin skin for the first time, inside the elbow, and blew out a couple of the lines. A blowout is when the needle goes a little too deep and the ink spreads a bit in the soft slushy layers of the skin. It looks like a permanent bruise, and in this case it looked like the tattoo was trying to cover up track marks. She didn't say much about it at the time, but I knew she was pissed. Luckily, I was eventually able to shade over the area and cover up the mistake when we added to the tattoo. Got a small tattoo on my foot. As he was making a line I heard him say whoops. I now have a stray line that's jutting off away from the rest of the tat. Fortunately over time it has faded, but it's such a shitty tattoo. The whole thing is just the worst. It was only $60, so I didn't say anything and just told myself one day I'd get it covered up by something better. As other artists have said, none besides some blowouts and wonky lines that were fixable when I was a new artist. But I fixed some really fucked up ones. Mostly spelling mistakes. Some terrible ones. But I had to do a cover up of one of a guy's son. The portrait was wonky and obviously done by a kitchen wizard. The worst part was that all the designs the scratcher did around it were for a girl. They were not approved by the client. The scratcher that did it thought it was a little girl and did all kinds of pinks and hearts and bows in the hair and around it. The worst part, he wrote, "Daddy's girl." The lettering basically butted right up against the portrait on top and bottom, so just covering up the designs wasn't possible. It needed a full-on cover up, which I would have recommended regardless because of the shit portrait by itself. So we covered it up with an approved design and he came back to my shop for my version of the hyper-realistic portrait of his son that he wanted. When I first opened my shop I was super nervous about making mistakes, and those first few clients were a roller coaster of anxiety. Well, of course one of my first clients came in and asked for a tattoo to be covered because another artist screwed it up. The tattoo was meant to be a peanut riding a motorcycle. However, the tattoo artist screwed up and it looked like a penis riding a malformed motorcycle from hell. So I get to work covering it up with a new design. She asked for a raven to cover it up, since I could color the raven in black and cover up the other artist's mistake. No problem, all good, right? No, the tattoo was in a super awkward position and the client wouldn't stop squirming. Eventually I finished, and to my dismay I noticed my fuck up. I didn't cover the peanut part of the original tattoo properly, and the raven looked like it had a little penis coming out of it. When she realized, she was angry and demanded it be fixed. The only solution I saw was to attach another smaller raven to the original one as a sort of chain link. The client now tells people that the tattooist had chained ravens because our inner darkness must be chained, but we both know why she really got it. Ha, little penis man. Back when I first started tattooing, I think I'd only been doing it for about 3 months at this point. One of my pals asked if he could come to me for finger tattoos. I asked my mentor, and he said it was too early for me to move on to hands just yet. One of the other guys in the studio overheard and said he'd actually been wanting to get his fingers tattooed for a while. If my mentor was happy with it, he'd let me practice on him. My mentor okayed it, so he got to work on the stencil. The tattooist I was practicing on is ambidextrous and had an exact font in mind for his finger tattoos, so he said if I got everything set up, he'd freehand the script, no stencil, on his hands, and then we could just get started. I finished the first hand, everything was fine, until I went on to start his second hand, at which point he was checking out the tattoo I'd just finished, and realized he'd written the script out left to right facing him. Meaning to everyone else the finger tattoos were backwards. Just the phrase, not the whole letters. Cue much panic. Me convinced he's going to go mental at me for not noticing. He convinced he's landed me in it with my mentor before we both calmed down and started spitballing on how to fix the tattoo on the fly. The phrase he'd gone for, riffraff, was thankfully similar enough on each hand that all we had to do was block out the vowels a bit more and make them slightly larger than the other letters in order to hide the original vowel underneath. In the end we fixed it. He got the tattoo the right way around, and you can't even tell there was once a mistake under it. When I started tattooing I was working at an awful studio that would often give me works that didn't fit my style in any way. Very fine line works which I wasn't very good at. The mistakes I made were usually crooked tattoos or going too deep, and instead of actual helping me the owners either would yell at me later, force me to tell clients I was more experienced than I actually am, and got upset that I asked too many questions. Eventually they just stopped giving me work altogether. Sadly, every once in a while they give my number to unhappy clients that I tattooed at that time, and I still get calls asking me for compensation. I know it's also my fault for those things, but they really took of any responsibility. These days I have my own small one-person studio. I have nothing but sweet and satisfied clients, and ironically I do a lot of fine line tattoos, which I used to hate at that studio. But if you want something specific, while I was in the studio some girl wanted a cursive tattoo that was extremely tiny. It was extremely small and thin, and when I finished it looked good, but when it healed a lot of the letters spread and mashed up together, and because she barely had any tattoos it was very noticeable. I gave her money back, even though she demanded me to pay for tattoo removal. And yes, she signed a contract beforehand, but the studio told me it protected only them and not me. I read thoroughly and fortunately realized she had no case against me, so she couldn't sue. In general today I recommend people to steer clear of that place. Disgusting money grabber assholes. They do treat other tattoo artists who work for them like shit. Tattooing a kanji backwards. Client brought in the reversed image. I made a stencil and applied it, and the client checked it in the mirror and gave the okay. Came back the next day claiming I did it wrong. I pulled the original out of my box and held it up next to the tattoo and said, nope, that's what you brought in. Felt bad, but still laughed when she left. Long story short, you as a client are responsible for spelling. Tattoo artists are not cultural experts or professional grammar narcissists. You pick it, we just stick it. Unfortunately, during my apprenticeship I messed up plenty of tattoos. My mentor wouldn't exactly mentor me. He would pop in while I was tattooing, say nothing and leave. Then give me advice after the fact, instead of giving me direction during the process, so I wouldn't fuck things up. I wasn't allowed to buy machines. He was very old school. I had to build my own machine and needles. Well, I'm not mechanically inclined at all, so I constantly had machines on the fritz, which of course affects everything. He also wouldn't give me a reliable power source. I had to use this massive ancient power source that was used by hospitals in what appeared to be the 80s. It would also go on the fritz, making at times my needles stop right in the skin, making me cut them. What a nightmare. Dang, I'm late to the party. This didn't happen to me, but to an artist that used to work in the booth next to me. Some lady comes in and wants a pocket watch with roses in her arm, so my coworker agrees to do it. The client specifically wanted the pocket watch to be stopped at 420. He draws it up for her right arm and she's so excited, but for some reason she decides to change it to the left arm last minute. No problem. He runs in the back to the printer to mirror the image. She loves it, and they slap the stencil on and start tattooing. When they are almost done, he realizes when they mirror the image, the clock doesn't say 420 anymore, it says 740. He doesn't know what to do besides finish the tattoo. When the client checks it out in the mirror, she doesn't notice and fucking loves it. The lady ended up coming back a few weeks later to say once again how much she loved it. I always wonder if she ever found out. This happened back in 2012 when I was really new at this. I was tattooing a good friend of mine. He wanted a clock tattoo, my first one ever, with Roman numerals with a mask next to it. Once the drawing was done, we realized that the mask was not fitting properly on the leg due to other tattoos he had. So I went to the printer and flipped the design, mirrored, put it on the leg, and it was more than perfect. I start the tattoo, we chat, and then I'm done. He gets up and checks in the mirror to see the final result, and he realizes that the clock had the Roman numerals flipped. 3 was at 9. We both froze, laughed it up, and went back on the table to fix it. At the end, it turned out to be not as bad as I thought it would be. I'm late to the party, but my grandma passed away and I got her date of birth, date of death, with a hummingbird in the phrase "your wings were ready, but my heart was not." So artist had it all drawn up, I approved it, she finished, I paid, and left. Got to my mom's, showed her, she loved it. Posted a picture on Facebook, and 5 minutes later my cousin texts my mom about my grandma's date of birth. At that very moment I realized with horror that I had the wrong month in her date of birth. Apparently November is the 11th month, not the 10th. Who knew? Added to it, I laughed as soon as I realized what had happened. My grandma would not have been pleased with me getting a tattoo in the first place, even though I have others, so I take the mistake as her last. Fuck you. Also, Mr. Comma, I've been fairly lucky and able to fix or cover everything I've done. It's all little stuff like always only has one L, getting a date mixed up on translation while going through various fonts, or the dreaded starting coloring the wrong side of an nautical star. Shit still gives me chills, and I've developed a bit of OCD asking and double checking all the things. I've got 16 years in this game, and I'm only a human. The absolute worst I've witnessed, a guy did a huge flowy script on a girl's thigh. Supposed to be born to lose, actually said born to lose. The only thing I could do was a massive cover up. My husband works at a tattoo shop. One of our friends from the gym we go to lost their child. Since they knew us, they went to the shop my husband works at as the piercer. The tattoo artist drew it up, and they approved it. Well, he accidentally invented the death date to 02 instead of 20. They only realized it after the first tattoo was done on the wife. The husband went ahead and got the wrong date as well. The tattoo shop paid for laser removal and correction. The clients were very cool about it, but the artist was a wreck. If it weren't a child's memorial tattoo, I don't think he would have been as upset. It's all been fixed at this point. I went to college with a veteran tattoo artist, and she told me that she's made a few mistakes, but nothing too crazy. She told me the worst freak out a customer had was when she was making a Celtic, not to his own specifications. Despite her telling him that that isn't how they're supposed to look, he paid for it anyways. She made the tattoo, and the idiot didn't like the results, and pushed over a couple shelves, and broke the window with a chair. In frustration, all while cursing her out. When he was arrested for his blunder, the police uncovered a lot more about him than his terrible tattoo idea. American English to light that not only was he addicted to heroin and evaded taxes, but he also abused his wife and son. I used to do kitchen tattoos for a lot of people in high school. I was always very careful as you can be with no formal experience, but one day I really fucked up. My friend came over while my parents were out of town. We smoked 4 blunts and downed 2 bottles of whiskey. Afterwards we were fucked up chilling in my bedroom when he asked if I would give him a tattoo. When I say I was fucked up, I mean fucked up. I said yes. He asked me to give him a big sun with a face on his chest. So I went for it completely freehand. This thing is a solid 4 to 5 inches wide, and it looked demonic. Like the sun from the Teletubbies got hit by a semi. He tried to pick the scabs to get rid of it, but that thing would not budge at all. He never seemed upset. He kinda just laughed it off. I ended up fixing it later on and now it looks decent, but years later it still keeps me up at night. I'm now a tattoo apprentice and I love it. But don't stick and poke, guys. Especially if you're intoxicated, lol. I was tattooing the inside of an ear for the first time, the cartilage, not like inside the inner ear, and my mentor was showing me a trick they use when stretching the ear skin involving holding the ear back with Q-tips, holding like chopsticks cause they get slippery. It seemed a little awkward, but he did my mentor's instructions despite the odd angles. Right as I was putting in the final line, the Q-tip slipped, and I party dotted my client on the helix as her ear flipped back. Luckily the client was a regular of mine. Since I first started and laughed about it, I was more traumatized than she was. Offered to waive the cost and she insisted on paying me anyway and tipped handsomely. So lucky that happened with a chill ass regular and not some asshole Karen or Chad.